Just like to invite everybody to introduce yourself if you want to in the chat. And if you want to say anything about yourself so we can all be a community, we welcome that. We are Takoma Stormwater Solutions, and we want to know everybody everywhere who cares about what we care about.
Yeah, and I think there's some things that I can say while we're getting fixed up. I'm Steve Whitney. I'm with Takoma Stormwater Solutions. Been with the group like Bern and Rob and Philip since the beginning, and which was in 2021. And we know that a community can't prepare to completely eliminate flood risks, but we know we can absolutely reduce those risks significantly. And in doing so, we can make important community improvements that are worthwhile in themselves. And is what we're here to talk about tonight. Thanks for joining. The webinar is being recorded, and a link will be put up on our website so you can replay it. One of our biggest hopes to accomplish this evening is to enlarge our mailing list so we can keep sending information out to interested people in stormwater in Takoma Park. We've kind of gotten things going again for this year. Just now, we plan future events, including meetups where people can go and see sites in the city that are working. What we wanted to do tonight was really aim for a bit of a tutorial on what we call nature-based solutions, because that's a very important part of our future. But before we do that, we have a presentation from a researcher, Dr. Ellis at the University of Maryland School of Landscape Architecture. We hope we can fill the screen soon and you can see the pictures. And I'd also say that our speakers can each individually fill the hour. There's no question they have a lot of expertise. We ask you to put questions in the chat, and we will answer as many of those questions in the Q&A at the end as possible. We will follow up with all questions, and we will put answers to those questions also on the TSS website. You will see the TSS website URL when we get our slides going. Dr. Ellis, wonder if you'd be able to share your presentation and see how that works.
All right. Can everyone see that?
All right. I'd just like to say as an introduction that nuisance stormwater, which is kind of what we're all very familiar with, can become catastrophic stormwater under certain conditions. There's a neighborhood in Baltimore that Dr. Ellis has worked with, and this is as often happens, a low-income neighborhood, and stakeholders have a hard time discussing just what the risks are. And Dr. Ellis did some really extraordinary research for these people to help them bridge that gap. Very lucky that he's taken the time to give us a brief summary of the work he's done. So please take it away, Dr. Ellis. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes, thank you for that introduction. And yeah, I'm a landscape architect. I've been working in this area of stormwater management for many years. Recently been getting more interested in how to share information, specifically flood information or hydrologic information, across the non-technical expert realm, so that everybody can sit around the table and discuss this at the same time. So just some sort of preliminaries that everyone is aware of, that climate change is increasing the flash floods in the United States, that death or natural disasters or flooding, I'm sorry, is a leading cause of natural disaster and death by natural disaster in the United States, although Heat related is probably close to matching that at this point. And some other things, of the 34 storm-related disasters in the state of Maryland over the last 70 years, nearly half of those occurred in the last 10 years, right? So that's just talking about the fact that um, they're coming faster, and our numbers are going up in terms of precipitation. There's some numbers about how many claims there are, FEMA claims there are in Maryland, as well as some of the reported effects, stress levels, lost work, lost valuables, and so on, that people report. So the work that I've been doing is taking modeling, in this case, a model called WIN TR55, to just do some basic small watershed modeling for a community called Broadway East up in Baltimore. And to be able to take those numbers and visualize it so that people who are non-technical experts can understand it. Want to kind of bridge that gap, so that everybody has sort of an equal hand in the discussion. And we're not just relying on a small subset of people to tell us what's going on. We believe that the 3D visualizations can translate the scientific modeling effectively, and that if you view it in a VR headset, which of course we can't do tonight, but I'll try to do my best to virtually do it. But using VR headsets to give people a sensation of actually being at these floods. It's different than seeing it on a screen or on a poster on the wall. So we've maybe familiar with images like this. This is in Baltimore in 2019. The good thing about images like this is it helps us to understand how flooding is actually working in these communities. And so if you find yourself in a situation where you are at a flood and you can take some pictures, you should do so and share them with people in the community. The problem with this, of course, is that the cars that are in this image, the businesses, they were damaged from this. And so what we want to do with the flood modeling and visualization is to try to experience this kind of flooding, but without any damage to property. So who does flood risk assessment? That would be insurance assessors mostly and local governments. The rest on this list are all professionals who are involved in doing the actual modeling for the flood assessment. And then what type of data is used? Typically flood zone maps, topography, elevation data, historical records, and so on. These are very helpful. And if you're a modeler, I do modeling, you really need all this information, but it's difficult for most people in the public to look at these things and really understand what's happening at the ground level or at the site level. This is flood visualization with the NOAA sea level rise viewer. This was taken down at one point, but it's back up again. So you can still see this. The problem with this is really good for regional level work, but at the site level, at a building, I mean, you can pick out buildings in here, but not really understand what's going on at the ground level. So that was St. Michael's on the Eastern Shore. And this is from a report for St. Michael's in 2020. And this is kind of the level of visualization that you can get from that report, is an indication of where a berm would be. And you can see pretty high resolution from the air where the buildings are. And so you might recognize your backyard if that's your house on that street. And then on the left, these section elevations, which are pretty generic. They're really not designed from anybody's backyard here, but just to get a concept across. And they're helpful to a point, but still, I think, not as helpful as they could be. This is the flood mapping that you can get from PG Atlas, Prince George's County online GIS viewer. I'm actually doing a work on this area for them as we speak, and then this relatively new kind of mapping system with more information that you can get. But still, we're looking at a mapped image. And the houses are pretty small. And if you're good, you might be able to find your house in there if you lived in this area. But still tough to uh, to understand. So the work we did is in Broadway East. You can see where that is relative to downtown Baltimore. It's a very low income community that really needed help, and we were needing to do the work. So they were very grateful. They knew they had flooding issues, and so I'll show you what we did for them. This image, you can see a circle in the upper sort of right part of the image. That's the intersection that we focused on. You can see these dots are all properties, and the darkest red is the most extreme flood risk potential, and so on. So you can see this sort of valley. It's not really a valley. If you're standing there, it doesn't look like a valley, but it's a low area where water concentrates and goes down. So the first thing you need to do is to identify where the watershed is. So the dashed black line is that, and then you model for that. And we modeled for 4 different intersections. The one that we are showing the visualizations for is the one that's being circled there. So one of the first things you do is identify the soils, because the soils will tell you how much you can expect water to infiltrate or not. If it's sandy soils like the A soils, you'll get a lot of infiltration. If it's D soils, it's like clay. It's no better really than a parking lot. We won't get much infiltration from that. And with that, we add the land cover. So you see buildings or rooftops in here, impervious surfaces, and open space. And those can help. This image here is the same as the previous one, except you can see an aerial photo before it or behind it. And so it's telling you what the quality of that open space is. And with that, we can then start to plug that into this model. So the model is looking for, if you can see across the top, you can see A, B, C, and D. These are the soil types, hydrologic soil types. And then we associate with that. And then the land cover is all on the left side here. And what we need to do is figure out how many acres of this type of land cover is in this soil type and put those acres into this model. So it's a bit of a black box, but if you understand the data that's going into it, you can kind of understand how the model is working. The next step is to identify the time of concentration. That's the amount of time it takes for the most remote piece or drop of water to get to the confluence point where you have an outfall. So we want to know how long is the longest possible time that it takes for a drop of water to get to there. Because once that happens, then as long as your rainfall is continuing at the same rate, the entire watershed's going to be saturated, and you'll be getting your peak flow coming through that spot. A couple of things that you can get off of this is the time of concentration here is less than, so this is in hours, it's less than half an hour. It's actually 25 minutes, which is pretty flashy. And also the velocity of the water is 3.45 feet per second. If you've ever stood in water that's moving at 3.45 feet per second, you're not standing, actually, you're probably swimming. So this is the graph that comes out of this. Flashy storms will have a very narrow and tall peak to the graph, and a very healthy stream system would be low and wide. That means that it takes more time for the water to ramp up and go out, and also to leave the system. So this is the intersection we looked at. And then the other piece of information that's super helpful from here, you can see that the drainage area is about half a square mile, and that we're looking at the 10-year storm in cubic feet per second. So just remember this number, 1280, we rounded up to 1282. So that's going to show up in the next few slides. All right, so here is the total peak flow. If there were no pipes under the ground and everything was going over the ground, then a 10-year storm would give you 1282 cubic feet per second. But we do have pipes under the ground. And the pipe in this intersection is actually 96 inches, which is 8 feet. A grown-up can stand in that pipe and reach out their arms in both directions and not touch the ceiling or the walls, right? So it's a big pipe. It brings a lot of water. The other thing about this intersection is it is a depression. So when you see a closed contour like this 86 contour, it's either going to be a peak, like a summit with the contour around it, or it'll be a depression. In this case, it's a depression, and the depression has to fill up before it can spill out and go down. So we zeroed in on this one because we knew it was particularly problematic. So there's the pipes underground and the intersection. And so there are a number of different ways you can model the pipe flow. And this is the equation for Manning pipe flow. There's also the Hayes and Williams. And we actually use the Hayes and Williams. So this is a big table that really can be summarized as total peak flow. This is the modeling that we did at the beginning with 1282, plus the underground pipe flow, which came out to 738 is the volume that we're using. And so if you subtract the pipe flow from the total peak flow, you can get the surface flow, which is in this case 543 cubic feet per second. Okay. And remember back that the velocity was 3.45, and it's just pure luck that these numbers are backwards, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 5, 4, 3. I do this again, it'll never happen, but it's helpful to remember. So the next step is to figure out how does this translate into a floodplain? So you've got sort of a base at the top and then a depth to it. And so really all you have to do is take your peak flow in the simplest form, cubic feet per second, and divide it by your velocity in feet per second. That gives you square feet, okay? And that's the cross section that we're going to be looking for. The cross section here is 157 square feet, but I'm simplifying it down to 150 for the purposes of looking through the slides that are coming up. So area of a triangle, for those of you who haven't been in a math class for a while, is 1/2 times the base times the height. And so we do this. Here's our base at 300 feet and our height of 1 foot with the area of a triangle, base times height divided by 2. That gives 150 square feet. So that's about the size of the floodplain that we're looking for in that neighborhood. Or if it's 150 feet across, then it would have to be 2 feet deep. And that would give us our 150 square feet, or at 100 feet and 3 feet deep, we would also be at 150. So that gives you a sense of how you can change, how your water column going through might change a little bit. And you can then use that to build a graphic like this one that can help you as you move it through your modeled landscape to get close to where those tops are. And the top of the water. And in reality, you really need to take a complete cross section. So this is an actual cross section from the model that you'll see in a second. And this adds up to 257 square feet. So here's the neighborhood. Again, this isn't a 3-dimensional model. There's 2 steps really, if you're going to do this visualization, is to build the 3D model first. And then there's another piece of software that makes it look very realistic. So this is how we built the 3D model. And this is that same model with the floodplain in there. So you can see that laid out in the neighborhood. And at this point, if we were together, I'd have you put the headset on. Today, we'll have to do a virtual reality. But this is the neighborhood. And I actually have a stereoscopic camera that took this picture here. But with the headset on, I can actually superimpose that underground pipe so you can see what that would look like. This is the model that was put together for that neighborhood. And then we were able to simulate what the water would look like in that area because we did the floodplain mapping and the 3D environment. So a lot of information you can get off of this. We actually put these flood gauges. They're not actually there, but for the purposes of seeing how deep the water was, we can do that kind of thing. We can also visualize from the air to see how water would move through. And there's different types of information or assessments that you'd make by looking down from above as opposed to looking at it from the ground level. Now, this is the same intersection from a different direction. Different kinds of information you can see. And then this, if you were in the intersection looking up one of the streets, this is the model. The first one was the photograph, and then the flooding. This is actually a 30-year flood, not a 10-year flood. And same intersection looking down the hill and the flood. So we actually, to research some of this, not just to put it together and show it can be done, we tested 50 people, 51 people actually, in, in answering questions about flood risk assessment using different images. And we're just sort of going through the data associated with this. But for those of you, I know some people may have participated in our study. This was the experiment that we did. This is one of sort of the payoff slides. We went through each question individually. This one is an aggregate. We had 9 questions, and we were just in this. This output is telling us that of the 9 questions, the 3D eye level and the 3D aerial were both either as effective or more effective than the 2D maps and 2D sections in helping to answer those questions. I'm a modeler, so the table is really important to me as well. But that didn't fare well with a lot of people who were not experts. So that's it for me. I'm going to hand this back to Stephen to take us to the next.
Okay, thanks very much, Dr. Ellis. I hope people appreciate the complex data that is handled in one of these models, and it's important for, I think, our city to understand that if we wanted to do something like this, collecting data is very important. But the beautiful thing is that this is technically possible. It's been done in Baltimore. It could be done in Takoma Park. I know that some people on the city council, for example, have said, I wonder what it would look like if we had a 100-year storm. We know that it is possible to do this. It's just a question of making it happen, funding and so forth. Let's see. Are we able to fill the screen yet? Or I guess, okay, I guess we're here where we want to be. All right. We're going to just wind back a bit and just again welcome you to the webinar. And Rob, can we just move on to the next slide?
Okay.
To learn about TSS and our activities, we'd like you to look at our website. The URL is here on the screen. This will be recorded, so you can get this later on, but it's Takoma Stormwater Solutions.net. We came together, could I have the next slide, please? TSS came together after the September 10th, 2020 rainfall. It was a massive rainfall at levels thought all but impossible in Takoma Park. We now know that records of past precipitation are alarmingly outdated by climate change. Professor Ellis just mentioned this in the beginning of his talk. The sights around the city that day were horrifying. When the photo of the backyard on the left was taken, the homeowner cried out that she'd never seen flooding like this. If you move over to the right, you can see flooding on New Hampshire Avenue. And then further east, I thought it was interesting to show that this flooding cascades across the city all the way over to the Anacostia River. What we are looking at is actually Route 50, not the Anacostia River. The flooding, this kind of flooding just accumulates over distance. Now, our problem here in Takoma Park, the water that's running through this yard is coming from uphill, not downhill. We instinctively imagine flooding as something rising from a river or stream. That's not the way it happens in an urban setting. Not even in our low spots like the Maple Avenue Stream Valley. TSS has mentioned the vulnerability of the Maple Avenue section of the city to potential flooding. Rain expected to drain through storm sewers gets blocked for various reasons and ends up going downhill over roadways, yards, parking lots, and wherever the surface is saturated or impervious. Could I have the next slide? Okay, what are we doing already? What is being done in the city is managed by our Department of Public Works, that's DPW. They have a specific focus, which is to comply with clean water mandates. These are important. They're intended to reduce the amount of pollution communities like ours dump into the Chesapeake Bay watershed. 3 of our speakers tonight are professionally involved with protection of the bay. Their local residents also live with threats of flooding from pathological events like hurricanes, so they share our water volume focused problems. Here we spell out what MS4 means. You should all know what MS4 means. Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System. Takoma Park is the manager of its MS4. It's a challenge that our city took on quite some time ago, but Silver Spring, for example, their MS4 system is managed by the county. Ours is managed by Takoma Park. That's why we collect stormwater fees. Could I have the next slide? Our main MS4 activities are maintaining existing stormwater infrastructure. That's the gray infrastructure that we hear about. There's a picture of a little detail of gray infrastructure over on the right. This is Poplar Avenue under a part of the street that I didn't know had a storm sewer, but there it was. It's being worked on right now. But the city has installed a lot of treatment facilities that use some nature-based processes, and I've just shown you a couple of them. They've put in 88 of these, and that's a lot of work. At Takoma Park, the Department of Public Works has been very proactive with this approach. Could I have the next slide, please? Now, the problem with that approach is that it's very expensive. TSS does not have the solution, but we do believe that some changes in city policy are happening that are very promising. New information on the webpage says that the city is looking at addressing stormwater issues on private property. And even better, they're exploring ways to support projects on multiple properties. That way you can cover more ground with a single project. That's a breakthrough because it may incentivize neighbors to collaborate on solutions. And one of the themes that you'll hear through the presentations tonight is the importance of collaboration. The city has also worked with an organization called myrainplan.com. You can look at that rain plan website. You can enter your address. You can get an estimate of stormwater runoff from your property. And it also provides links to solutions, funding sources, and a free professional consultation. TSS really has not evaluated that in any depth, and but it's available. Okay, could I have the next website, next page, please? Okay, something to explain is that our city covers stormwater. The county is responsible for flooding. I don't really know what the specific legal definitions are, but the one thing that we do know is that the county is collecting really important data that would be of use for the city for a comprehensive stormwater management plan. And that's one of the things that TSS has asked the city to get to work on. The city has done a lot of work on individual problem sites. That's important. The proactive 88 nature-based sites, bioretention sites, and swales and things like that. But we don't really have a plan with the kind of data that we get from the county, it should be a really big plus for us. Now, let's move to a presentation by Mike Lynn. Mike is an ecological designer and founder of Eastern Ecosystems. This is an environmental consultancy. Mike has years of experience. He's an articulate advocate and practitioner for nature-based solutions, and he's going to cover the general principles of nature-based solutions and how that intersects with the gray infrastructure that is the traditional way of dealing with stormwater. So, Mike, let's go to the next slide and let's Mike take it from here. Mike,
Fantastic.
can you get
Hi.
online?
Yep, I'm here. Does everybody hear me okay?
Thank you. Yes.
Perfect. Well, thank you for the warm introduction. Happy to be here. Excited to be here. Although that is going to be a tough act to follow, Dr. Ellis. That is some very cool stuff that you're doing there, and I look forward to seeing how that continues. And I know we're a little short on time, so I'll go through this a little quicker than because if you gave me all hour, I would nerd out on this for the next 3 hours. We go to the next slide. So as you said, ecological design, nature-based solutions, what does that all mean? That means at its base, we look to the natural systems that existed long before we started building and say, okay, how has, not to anthropomorphize nature, but how has nature solved these problems? Because chances are nature's been here a long time, has a very effective, efficient way of doing that. So can we take those natural patterns and processes that nature uses and either copy them, build up ecosystems in our communities, or can we at least take the processes and patterns and institute them into some of the designs that we work with? Next slide, please. So that's the approach. And here we're working at Stormwater with that core principle. And you'll hear me echo this. If you could boil my presentation down to 3 phrases, it is slow it down, spread that water out, and try to soak it in. So with the goals here being urban resilience. So we're Takoma Park, pretty urban environment. How can we make that resilient with the climate change that we see with these increasing storm intensity and frequency? How do we clean the water? Because the MS4 permitting and some of that is sometimes driven by water quality. So can we clean the water as it hits that gray infrastructure that Steve pointed out? And really the big one is flood reduction. Can we reduce the runoff or at least mitigate some of that it doesn't do damage and cause the flood? Next slide, please. So as I said, slowing it down, flatten that curve. Dr. Ellis showed that really hard spike in Baltimore and the flooding that results from that. So it's not that we're necessarily removing all that water, it's we're slowing the time that it takes to hit the waterway down and spreading it out, increasing that surface contact, and then trying to soak it in, which can be challenging in Takoma Park because you have a lot of clay there in certain areas. Those soil types Dr. Ellis alluded to, great for building foundations, not so great for infiltration. So that's something we'll talk about it right at the very end, is what does that look like? So just why we're going over this now, a very zoomed out, Missy Lauterbach's going to be talking about BMPs, best management practices, both a technical term. You'll see that sometimes if you get nerd out into the technical literature like I do, but it's also kind of a common term that just represents rain gardens and bioswales and permeable pavers and a whole litany of tools we have at our disposal. So I kind of look at those as the tactics. Right now, we're zoomed out to the strategy level and saying, okay, what are we trying to accomplish? Because that will facilitate as you plan as a community, as an organization, as you talk with, whether it's contractors, whether it's your government officials, whether it's NGOs, maybe some, because there are a lot of grants and funding available. It'll give you that kind of common language. And by having that zoomed out, knowing what we're trying to accomplish, then we can select what may be the best tactic or BMP for your particular area. Because then we can zoom in with Missy's presentation and look at what can we do on individual properties. Next slide, please. So as I said, flatten that curve. My wife is a nurse practitioner, and during COVID, we heard flatten the curve, flatten the curve. What the goal was is they knew they were going to get so many patients. What they wanted to do is spread out the time where those patients showed up at the hospital. Because if they showed up at one time, overwhelm the system, hospital couldn't handle it. If those patients were spread out over weeks and months, then they could see every patient and treat. And we're doing the same thing with stormwater. If we can slow that water down, have it, if you'll forgive the pun, let it walk off the property instead of run off the property, that's ideal, because then it has time for those streams and those waterways and the gray infrastructure to take the excess away. So we're not causing that flood. So it slowly moves down that watershed and hits the storm sewer system or the creek or whatever that may be, but not all at one time. Gives it time for more infiltration. And the way we accomplish this are by the BMPs that Missy's going to talk about in a little bit. Next slide, please. So spreading out, if we can increase that surface contact, that does a number of things. By spreading that out across the landscape or within the BMP, that allows the gray infrastructure. So what gray infrastructure is designed to do is take that water from the problem spot and move it somewhere else, which it does very well. But that also concentrates that flow by spreading it out. We slow it down just by spreading it out, and we reduce that concentration. If you dig a hole, pour 5 gallons in, it takes a little while for that 5 gallons to disappear. If you spread that 5 gallons out across your yard, that 5 gallons disappears fairly quickly. So that's what it's doing. As it flows over the surface, it's also removing pollutants, sediment, that type of thing. And if we have it on the surface, we have it spread out as it moves down the hill, again, slowly down the hill now, or slowly into the stormwater system, we're lessening the risk of failure, because with those pipes, with those culvert, with gray infrastructure, there's the risk of failure. And we still need it. I'm not advocating to get rid of it, but take, for instance, if you have a heavy storm, washes branches and some debris, clogs one of those pipes. Now you have that pipe back up. Now you have localized flooding, and that water finds somewhere else to go, because it's still going to go downhill. But now maybe it's eroding, maybe it's going into a structure where you don't want, damaging roadways. So by spreading it out higher on the landscape before it gets to the gray infrastructure, you're reducing the risk of failure. And again, we do that through BMPs. All right, next slide, please. And finally, soaking in. Again, can be a bit of a challenge depending on what type of soil you have. What this does is, one, it reduces the amount that hits the system. Two, it allows that groundwater. So you'll have some to go on the surface, you'll have some soak in. It doesn't mean that that you're drying out your stream. Actually, the reverse. It slowly makes its way down underneath the ground, subsurface flow to the stream, and it lets that stream be less, more ephemeral as opposed to seasonal. It keeps it going year round. Runoff reduction, but there are considerations you have to take into account here, and that is what kind of soil you have. Are you close to a foundation? If you get that water into the ground and do get it to flow, where is it going to flow? And at the end, I speak about community planning. That's why integrating this with a community plan is really important, because that will help you select the most ideal BMP. But the other thing this does is hydrate your landscape. So you're not having to irrigate, you're not having to water your lawn, you're not having to water your trees as often. So this has a number of what is called ecosystem benefits or ecosystem services that these natural systems can help provide. Next slide, please. And it's not, so you have gray and green, and you've heard us talk about both. Gray infrastructures, think of that as the engineered, the built environment. Green infrastructure is these natural systems, but it's not just that side or this side. There's also the spectrum, and Dr. Ellis alluded to this as well, where you'll have systems that can be natural functioning, but within an engineered system. And for an example, sometimes you'll need that in an area with high clay, because you'll need a certain type of medium for that water to infiltrate. And then if you go to the next slide, please, you have a hybrid approach where these things can overlap. So it's not an either or, it's a both and. The green infrastructure supports the gray infrastructure. The green infrastructure and gray infrastructure can be combined into hybrid systems. And then these systems work together. And the other benefit of that is you have kind of an adaptive strategy. So as you have more development, or as you have more storms, these green infrastructure systems can be adapted to fit that. Next slide, please. As we're obviously here for flood reduction, I won't go into great detail because we do want to get to Ms. Lauterbach's presentation, but just there's the obvious things with protection, water quality, and flood reduction. But if you go to the next slide, there's some maybe less obvious ones where you have cost reduction. A lot of times, green infrastructure can be significantly cheaper than the gray infrastructure. And again, it doesn't mean you have to have either or. You can get that green infrastructure, which means now you don't have to build your gray infrastructure quite as large because you're hoping the green infrastructure will planning on that taking care of it. You have the ecological benefits of it, the aesthetics. These things can be incredibly beautiful, raise your property values. There's a win. And then you also have one thing that's often overlooked is, especially when you get into trees, woody perennials, shrubs, that kind of thing, you have the transpiration that occurs, reducing, you may have heard on the news, the urban heat island effect. Well, this can counter that and actually cool that area, not only shade it, but also cool it through natural processes. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, on my side, really the best way of approaching this is, again, not an either or, but a both and how can we do that on individual landscapes? And then, but as a community, planning these things all together. So coming up with a plan, because one, that really makes these more effective. If you know that the community plan, because maybe you have a BMP that if you get a very big storm overflows, where's that outfall going to go? Is it going to go in your neighbor's yard? You don't want to move problem from one place to another. By community planning, you can identify areas where, hey, these would be great areas for certain types of BMPs. Maybe space allowance won't allow that. But in addition to that, you can get funding. There's a lot of times grants available. And as a community, you can get large funding to do these across the landscape. And by doing this, a lot of people, when I've worked with BMPs in the Anacostia Basin, they're like, hey, man, I've got this postage stamp size lot. I don't really feel like I'm making an impact. But if you look down the block, there's 10 other people doing the same thing. And if you aggregate that across your community, you can make huge, huge impacts. So that is all I have. Want to move on to Melissa, I think, is next. Thank you.
Yeah. Hey, Mike, thanks very much. That's exactly the kind of overview that I think newcomers to this need. Our next talk is going to be from Missy Lauterbach, who's been working with the Chesapeake Stormwater Network for their projects to promote stormwater management and other things in the Chesapeake Bay, very close to the Chesapeake Bay, although I think we would possibly be within their realm of interest. Missy knows a lot about the deep bag of home protection methods for residential scale projects, the BMPs, and she's gonna and she'll also talk about the Stormwater Network's annual Bubba Award, which is, I think, a wonderful idea that we should really consider here in Takoma Park. Let's move on to Missy's presentation. Thank you for coming, Missy.
Excellent. Thank you, Steve. So hello, everybody. I really appreciate being here. I'm excited to be a part of this conversation. As Steve said, I work for Chesapeake Stormwater Network, which is a small nonprofit located here in Maryland. We support and connect a network of professionals and advance better stormwater planning, design, and maintenance through training and technical resources. If you are interested in learning more about CSN, you can access our website. It's right on here, chesapeakestormwater.net. Next slide, please. All right, so here's a list of the most common BMP residential use BMP. So again, just a reminder, BMP is best management practice. So the purpose of a BMP is to manage the quantity or quality of runoff that's coming from whether it be a building or any kind of surfaces. So the whole point of these different practices are to slow that water down, just like Mike said, or have it infiltrate. And some BMPs will actually clean the water, so improve the water quality as well. So the important thing to understand is that not all practices will be suitable for every property. So there's many factors that go into determining which BMP will be most effective at which site. While I personally would love to have a beautiful rain garden in my front yard, I acknowledge that a traditional rain garden would not be the correct choice for my space. I also recognize that if I just choose to disconnect my downspout and have have it run over my front lawn, that's great for me, but I could be affecting the person downhill from me. So I need to recognize and think about that when I'm moving forward, when I want to do something in my property. The best way to determine which practice is right for your property is really to have a professional assessment done. Ideally, you want an assessment that kind of along the lines of what Dr. Ellis and what Mike were just saying is we want to look at the big picture. So citywide kind of watershed, we want to look at the middle picture or neighborhood or community wide. And then we want to zone all the way down into our private property. Looking at it from a holistic perspective is not only going to help our community be more resilient when all these storms kind of roll in even harder than they ever have before because of climate change, but also to help us determine the correct BMP for our specific site. Next slide, please. So we're just, this is just a little diagram of a traditional in-ground rain garden design. So some of the key points we're going to go through real quickly is going to be, we want to look at the fact that there is a bowl. That bowl usually has about 6 to 12 inches of ponding depth. So that means the plants that are in there are going to be able to absorb some of that water through that bowl, and it's going to slow it down. Again, like Mike was saying, that's going to allow it to infiltrate into the soil. Another important part about rain gardens is they have engineered soil mixtures, which are usually about 12 to 24 inches in depth. So a rain garden is not going to have just the soil that is naturally occurring there. That engineered doesn't have to be like something people hear that and they think, oh, it has to be, you know, plastic or something. No, it can still be a natural source, but it's just probably not the source that is originally sitting right in that bowl. But another thing that we want to think about is factors that are going to say if it's good for your property or not good for your property. It might be things along the lines of the topography or the slope of your property. Another thing could be that's really important, and it was touched on already, is the existing soils. Clay does not like to drain water. So if you have a ton of clay right under your rain garden, it might not be a great place to put a rain garden. And then a separation between the bottom of your rain garden and the groundwater underneath. You don't want a rain garden that's going to sit right on top of a water table. That could really affect the quality of the water under it. And then distance from foundations. Again, Mike touched on this a little bit. We don't want to put a rain garden directly against a house. The point of the rain garden is to infiltrate that water. If we're bringing water into the ground, you don't want that then ending up in the basement. So another important thing to note is there is a difference between rain gardens and conservation landscaping. So it's also known as bayscaping. The main goal of a rain garden is to collect and treat that runoff, whereas the goal of a conservation landscape is going to be to create and improve wildlife habitat. Both of them can help treat the water. Both of them are very, very beneficial, but they are not necessarily the same thing. You can make them the same thing, which is really amazing. You can put them together, but I just want to, as we're moving forward, recognize that like not every pollinator garden is a rain garden and vice versa. So it's important to keep that in mind as well. Next slide, please. So if we look at some alternatives to in-ground, if your property is not great for in-ground rain gardens, there are some really cool alternatives out there. If done well, they can act as a bioretention practice, just like a rain garden. So it'll actually help clean that water as well as slow it down. The stormwater coming directly from your rooftop can be maintained from these foundation and box planters. They can also be a nice alternative for small properties. So these can fit on back patios often. And they're also great for sites with slopes sometimes. And then ultra urban properties that are surrounded by hardscapes. These are also a really nice alternative. Next slide, please. So some of the key designs, if we want it to be a true bioretention practice, we want it to filter that water, not just slow it down, but we want to be cleaning that water as well. So some of the things we need to think about if they are against a foundation, which a lot of the times in cities and ultra urban places, they will be directly against the foundation, but they need a waterproof membrane between that foundation just so that water isn't seeping in. And then our overflows and our outlet drains also have to be directed away from the actual foundation. That's another really important thing. Oftentimes these will hook back into the municipal drains, which is fine if they're already permitted for it. If they are not, that is something you do need to get permits for, so keep that in mind. Next slide, please. All right, so now for the remainder of my part of the presentation, we're actually going to talk about our Bubba's Award winners. So Bubba's stands for Best Urban BMP in the Bay Award. The purpose of this contest that we hold is to spotlight and celebrate some of the innovative work that's been done around the Bay and to spark new and creative ideas for future designs. We just wrapped up this year's contest, so the next one won't be till 2027, which leaves plenty of time for new projects. There's also a cash prize for the overall winner, so that's just a little extra incentive to submit a project. So if you guys come up with a design for your area, please think about us and think about submitting one in a couple of years, which is awesome. The first project that I wanted to share was the headquarters of the Rivanna Conservation Alliance, which is located in Virginia, not in Maryland. When they first moved to this building, they quickly realized that there were quite a few factors that would make it impossible for them to have a traditional rain garden. And a less ideal stormwater management solution for this specific site. Hardscape removal was also not going to be feasible at this site, so they had to get creative. Next slide, please. So this is nicknamed bioretention in a box. These planters actually manage all of the rooftop runoff for the 1,400 square foot roof of this building. The taller the planters actually have underdrains and overflows that flow out into the lower level boxes. The total cost of this project was $12,000, but because the project was located in the city of Charlottesville, part of it was paid for by a grant from the Charlottesville Conservation Assistance Program, which was supported by the city's stormwater utility fees. Important to think about that, okay? Next slide, please. This next one I'm going to highlight is actually a creative solution to a property that has a significant elevation change. Next slide, please. The homeowners were continuously concerned about their patio and basement flooding and wanted to reduce the runoff coming from their roof. Unfortunately, their house is located downhill from any suitable space to put in and install a rain garden. If you see in the bottom left photo, they were channeling the downspouts across their patio, attempting to redirect the rooftop runoff. That's what those long black tubes are in the photo. Next slide, please. I apologize, there's a lot going on in these slides and I'm moving really quickly, but as Steve has mentioned, you guys can watch the recording later and look at more details if you want. The design solution for this property was to build an aqueduct leading from a gutter extension at the top of their roof in the corner uphill to a space where they actually installed a rain garden. Next slide, please. The photo on the right shows the completed aqueduct as well as the rain garden, which is that crescent kind of rocks shaped right there in the middle of the photo. And some of the conservation landscaping, which can be seen along the right side of the stepping stones. The photo on the top left shows the house in the background of the rain garden. The patio from the very beginning of the slides here is actually just downhill from where that is. And the bottom of the photo on the left is showing the aqueduct with water flowing. This project was actually completed just days before Hurricane Sandy hit in Maryland in 2012. And the owners were very pleased to report that there was absolutely no flooding on their patio whatsoever. And they actually didn't even have any standing water because of this redesign. This project is actually located in Montgomery County. And part of the funding for it was paid for by the Rainscapes program. Next slide, please. All right, so now I'm just going to highlight a little bit about of a community project, not a municipal project, but a community project to emphasize the importance of looking at that wider area, a little bit bigger than just your backyard, kind of what Mike was talking about. Next slide, please. This community was built in Anne Arundel County in the 60s and originally had no stormwater management on the property whatsoever. In 1974, a gray infrastructure retrofit was installed in this utility corridor that runs between the buildings, as seen in the photo on the left. Even though this alley was not being used by vehicles, you can actually see there was a great deal of soil compaction from foot traffic, and there was also evidence of a lot of erosion as well. The community members, along with the HOA, applied for a grant through Chesapeake Bay Trust. It was the Unity Gardens program. Next slide, please. Some of the site challenges for this project were the numerous underground utilities and mature tree roots that occupied this small space. Most of the excavation work that had to be done was completely done by hand, and the planting depth was actually reduced when they started to get in there. The design team integrated a stepping stone path through the meandering channel of conservation landscaping and bioretention areas to minimize future compaction because they knew there was going to be continued foot traffic. Next slide, please. The photo in the center is showing the existing 1974 stormwater inlet that has now been retrofitted into this beautiful rain garden or bioretention area with a gravel under drain. Since this project's completion, additional alleys in this specific community have also been retrofitted with similar designs and are frequently showcased on tours led by Anne Arundel County watershed stewards. The total cost of the first alley was $45,000. Next slide, please. And so this last one is actually located in Millersville. Due to the geology in this area, this neighborhood is notorious for groundwater seeps and wet basements. Some pumps throughout this neighborhood are constantly discharging water in the streets, even during the drier summer months. This property owner, which is the Blue House, struggled for years just to maintain this portion of her yard. It was constantly saturated, and she really wanted to create a wildlife garden or a habitat. The design solution was to remove the existing turf and replace it with a series of shallow pools that step down through the site and overflow to an existing stormwater inlet. The new wetland is fed by the natural seeps that are all over anyway, and also 2 downspouts and 5 sump pump lines. And 2 of those sump pump lines actually come from the property next door, all of which was previously discharged in the municipal inlet. And now this small little wetland is taking up all of that runoff and making great use of it. So one of the reasons I thought this was really great was because technically this is just on the one person's property, but they're taking up runoff from the other property as well, which is really, really beneficial. You know, that's what we're looking at. We're looking at community solutions. The last thing I just want to mention is that these areas, these gardens are really, really beautiful, but they most definitely take upkeep, right? So you can't just plant a rain garden or even a conservation landscape and just expect it to do its job and be fine. It takes maintenance, whether that maintenance is by the people that live, you know, on the property or in the community, or if you hire professional service, you have to keep in mind that they need to be maintained to be able to be effective and work properly. All right, and that is my time. I'm going to turn it back to Steve now.
Hey, Missy, thank you very much. Really exciting to see winning scenarios. It just again shows that the technology is there. There are obviously practical things that a place like Takoma Park is going to have to deal with. Our last speaker, sorry to keep you late, people, but stay on for Eric. Eric has been on the forefront of stormwater management in the Chesapeake Bay area for decades. He's assisted individuals and communities to get on board with MS4 compliance, including a key success factor, neighbors collaborating with each other and getting resources for their project. Eric, really excited to hear what you have to tell us.
All right, a tough act to follow, 30,000 feet at 500 miles an hour. Thank you, Rob, for keeping the wheels on the bus. First time I met Steve, as soon as we got off the phone, I went to the city website. And this is just a screen grab. And what I saw was an amazing resource, plans, updates. But what really surprised me, it was contact information, a name, email address, and a phone number of somebody to talk to. Because I can tell you, there's another municipality, same population, has flooding problems, is a phase 2 MS4. And just this little piece from your city website is their entire webpage dedicated to stormwater and MS4 compliance. So this is an amazing resource. I would use it. Next slide, please. I noticed in the chat that there were some questions about grants. I do some work with that sort of thing. I don't know about my availability of helping with all the questions that are out there, but I did put the websites down there. These people are still in business. They're still taking applications. There'll be a caveat that funding may be withheld if other things happen in the district, but education and outreach, residential scale BMPs like Mike and Missy were talking about, and also project design and construction, those larger practices that kind of work between the green and the gray, excuse me. I also think that with my very last slide, there may be a role with TSS in some of these grants. Next slide, please. First thing I did after I saw the website and talking to Steve was I go to Merlin. It's one of my go-tos, and a lot of people use this. That little arrow right in there is kind of situated, let's see, southeast of Carroll Avenue, southwest of Ethan Allen, and then just northwest of New Hampshire. And it's going to recur over the next couple of slides. But Merlin has an amazing number of environmental layers. And I wanted to look at the streams. I was curious what was going on. And what you'll notice just north of that is it looks like Sligo Creek just disappears for about a half mile. And you'll notice down there by New Hampshire where it comes in through PG and Montgomery County, it just kind of stops. And I thought that was a little odd. So I remember Steve telling me about the flooding on Maple Avenue and in other places around there. So I was really surprised that my go-to tool is not really as good as I thought. So next slide, please. So I immediately start falling back looking for older maps and things like that. So this 1900 topographic map, along with one from 1861 that had some of the streams from the district delineated on them, was what I was looking for. And so I noted where Carroll and Ethan Allen are on there. So you've got kind of some perspective. And again, that red arrow is in about the same location. Oddly, it used to be Sligo Branch, not Sligo Creek. You can take that up with the people back 125 years ago. But what I noticed is now you see this stream coming from Sligo up towards the arrow, okay? And it branches off 4 more times. You'll see that little pencil thin blue line going under Sligo Mills Road. Also, if you look at where Carroll Avenue is, now you go just north of there a little bit and you can see the stream that used to be where Maple Avenue runs. Okay, and this is all leading to something in just a minute. But what it brings up is what they call the concept of buried streams. Okay, and that's just simply that as the nation developed, cities grew, we just kind of filled in streams in some places. They might dry up a little bit, they might be seasonal, they just put debris in them, they may have put pipes in some of them. Some of them still exist, but may not be quite as large as they were. So they were piped for reasons, roads, utilities, things like that. The problem is stormwater and groundwater still try to use these systems because it's based on the topography of the land above and around and underneath these stream channels. Next slide, please. So then what I did was I dropped a layer from the U.S. Geological Survey's hydro layer onto a Google map. So what you're looking at, again, that red arrow, the same place. Well, now there's even more streams that seem to be showing up in that 1900 map. But look to the left and you'll see all the lines look like a computer chip, very straight. Those are most likely piped or were channelized or in a grass swale that may follow a roadway or something like that. It doesn't look natural, okay? When you get back over towards the red arrow, again, you begin to see all these little streams branching out. The ones in Sligo Creek are very smooth and represent the way that a stream channel flows and builds itself over time. But if you look just north of that arrow, you begin to see this little jagged turn here, turn there line. And so some of those streams in that area may be underground. and they may be interpolated by computer programs that's looking at the topography. So this is done a little bit by art, you know, using computer models and then ground truthing and things like that. Is there actually a stream there? Maybe, maybe not. It was filled with rubble. Water may be soaking into the ground and trying to move through and downstream. But this is what they consider kind of the drainage network for this area. You know, what's unusual about this is the way that all the water is trying to get down to Sligo Creek. This doesn't account for the rainwater that starts on your rooftop, what goes down your driveway, what enters the street, what then moves down to the storm drain system, and then ultimately tries to get down to Sligo Creek. So, you know, this is just kind of the larger channels that water will try to move. Next slide, please. Most of you know that back in 2024, the Low Impact Development Center, or LIDC, did the Stormwater Climate Adaptation Plan for the city. And they visited 20 sites around the city that had known flooding problems. And in some cases, they actually made suggestions on solutions. So what you're seeing now is the same version of the map. I ripped the red arrow out, but I tried to get those 20 points as close as possible to the addresses that were referenced. So you'll get a copy of this. I'll email it to Steve. It'll be a JPEG format. You can zoom in a little bit more and take a look at it. But some of these ultimately became the 10, what they called their project sites. I focused on these 20 because there was a detailed explanation of the type of flooding that was occurring. Okay. So, you know, in the plan, they noted that there was flooding that was occurring as overland flow. Some of it was going down the street and jumping the curb and then going into property. Some of it was undersized pipes, clogged storm drain inlets. There were a variety of issues, but there were also some where people were like, my yard gets wet, or this water just kind of comes from nowhere. And so that's what I was really getting interested in. Next slide, please. Okay, and so this is the final zoom in, and then I'll move on to some other stuff. But you'll take a look at the two lower map, or the two lower arrows there. Well, I guess at the top, these are examples of where in the plan they talked about it was surface runoff coming from a parking lot and down a hill into somebody's property and things like that. But if you look at those two arrows at the bottom, some of those just really eerily line up with the stream channels. Now, again, some is storm drains, some are open channels that still exist. But there are most likely areas in there because the neighbors are all standing there explaining to the folks from LIDC in the city that my yard just gets wet for no reason. And there apparently was no real channel there. So something's going on. And I think that this is something that can become a resource for Takoma Stormwater Solutions and the city to better understand where some of the flooding is occurring and possibly why. And that there may be linkages to groundwater down in these areas, as opposed to just simply surface runoff. Next slide. I'll get to my actual task now, which is neighbor-to-neighbor communication. I'm going to shift gears. You know, what you're looking at here is the Cliff Notes version, distilled down version of Maryland stormwater law. Caveat, I am not a lawyer, but I'm going to try to summarize it real quick because this is important when you start talking about stormwater in your neighbors. First of all, the downstream landowner must accept stormwater runoff coming from uphill properties if it historically flowed that way. Now, the word historical, lawyers are going to make lots of money on that. Was it 5 years, 10 years, 100 years, whatever? I'm not going to define it tonight, but it's just the way that the water has been flowing over time. Also, as a downstream landowner, if somebody is sending water your way, you cannot stop the flow of that water in such a way that it impacts the upstream property owner. So if somebody's got a grass swale that comes from their yard and goes through your backyard and you're just tired of it and you throw some stones in there and it backs up and floods their basement, they're going to come after you and the law would probably support them. Now, that doesn't mean that upstream landowners get away with murder. So upstream landowners, on the other hand, cannot make alterations that are going to impact the flow down on you. And this relates kind of more to the direction. So if they put in a swale and it starts hitting your house, they can't do that. It did not historically flow that way before. The other thing is they cannot increase the volume. And this is where you get into the impervious surfaces. And folks, Takoma Park by the plan, the LIDC plan is 43% impervious. There is a lot of hard surface out there. But if your neighbor upstream decides they want to extend their patio and expand their driveway and things like that, that will increase the volume or the amount of runoff coming down. And they can't do that to you. So I guess next slide. So, you know, this is where it comes to neighbor communication. The first thing you've got to do is look around your own property. And Steve and Rob, I'm about done here. I think I got about 5 seconds left. So the last thing you want to do is just go up to your neighbor and say, you're causing problems here, when it's your own downspouts that are ponding water and things. But if you do have a problem, go talk to your neighbor, meet with them, explain to them what's going on. And it may be a simple fix. They, you know, Missy showed that picture with those flex tubes extending the downspouts like 50 feet or so. Well, you know, those things can be turned in other directions. Maybe they can send it into their lawn instead of your area. So you do want to talk to them. You want to rule your property out again, so that it's, you know, it's not the cause of the problem, and you're not going to have egg on your face when you talk to them. I would say that, I think this is my last slide, isn't it? Yeah. So just, I think in closing on this, you know, TSS, I think, has an opportunity to help look at some of the stormwater projects on private property. The city may not have the staff or the ability to go on that. And again, they've already got some priorities, but look at getting grants, making landowner contact, maybe helping to get landowner permission to move forward, and taking that LIDC plan. LIDC plan is a really good starting point, but it'll be over with at some point, and you need to be ready to move on to the next phase. So some of those grants that I mentioned on the first page or the second page fund that sort of work. They'll do the assessments. You hire engineering firms to come in and do that sort of work. So with that, I'm going to yield back the rest of my time to the good gentleman from Takoma Park.
Eric, profound thanks for your spirit and for all the work you're doing. It's inspiring. I'm particularly interested in your coverage of the groundwater problems. I've heard it many, many times from people, the mystery, and to look at buried streams will help us sort out. It's a starting point for actually understanding what's going on. Just to close, let's see, maybe you can back up to that page with the preceding page. Yeah, just to have a couple of pages here of links to websites that are going to be of interest for various reasons. For example, the First Street Flood Factor website is not something that was mentioned today, but it's a nonprofit that, as someone said, is monetizing its wonderful information, and it's got some high-level information about stormwater threats in Takoma Park by single address. The thing is, I think everybody should look at it because real estate and insurance people are looking at First Street data. There are some shortcomings, people tell me, but it's important to know. I think the Chesapeake Stormwater Network website is important to look at. Eric mentioned it and some other people have mentioned it. Mike, the Chesapeake Urban Stormwater Professional Training Program is free. I hope people who live in Takoma Park would qualify to be part of it, but I know that things like this, there's the Anacostia Watershed Society also has a water steward program that's similar, but this one sounds particularly extensive and deep. And then, as Eric mentioned, the city's LIDC study is online. We got the link there. We will put these links, all of this will be on the TSS website for people to look at. I believe that wraps up what we're doing today. And sorry we ran over time. If people want to stay online, we could maybe put in 15 minutes more for Q&A, if that's okay.
Well, we had some questions in the chat. Most of them have been answered. Steve, the list of things you had on the slide, there were just 3 things, but you added a few more things, which somebody put up on the chat there. Mike Lynn, thank you for putting up the CUSP, the professionals training. Also, want to thank Eric for zeroing in on the Takoma branch and the LIDC study. These are things that the city has and is doing a little bit about, and they are also doing stuff on private properties. They just don't really acknowledge that, or was it Mike? I'm sorry, I might have confused who was giving me which information. Anyway, I want to thank all of the presenters, and I want to let Steve moderate the question session. Thank you. Go ahead.
Well, if we're going to use the it seems like a lot of these questions have been answered. I know that I noticed the question about where they would be able to get information about funding. And I think that in that case, to tell you the truth, TSS has not really researched this much. It was one of the main reasons that I was excited to have speakers from the Chesapeake Bay area, because they seem to be a lot more keyed into different areas of funding. And this is something that we will be researching, TSS. We will have a webinar later on about that specific topic. And would people please put in the chat one last thing? Any ideas that you have for follow-up topics that you would like us to do a deeper dive in? That is something that we talk about, the small group. There's about eight or 10 of us in TSS who are active pretty much a couple times a month. But input from the neighborhood would be great. Eric, you have your
Thanks, Steve. I want to point out, since TSS, you said you're 501c3, is that correct?
No, we are not, but
No,
we have
okay.
relationships with 501c3s who
If
could.
if you can get tight with a 501c3 in your area, like a friends group or something like that, they would be eligible for several Chesapeake Bay Trust grants that pay for the small scale BMPs, that pay for the design, things like that.
We do
There's been-
overlap. We do overlap with Friends of Sligo Creek.
Okay, yeah, so they may be the kind of the fiscal agent. I noticed some questions in there about different practices and things. And what you find out is the funders do not want to do an individual here, 6 blocks over, another one here, and then 3 blocks that way. They like to look more at community-based projects. There's an economy of scale with that sort of thing. So I would reach out to the Chesapeake Bay Trust and have them come in and speak about the different grant programs that they have.
Also,
Okay.
NIFWIF also has really great small watershed grants, but you do need to be a 501c3 in order to get them. So a lot of these larger grants that can help community-wide, which will help individual properties, you just kind of chunk them all together, are definitely going to be driven by you guys being linked with or a 501c3 yourself. So NIFWIF is another really great one.
Steve,
Could you put that in the chat, Missy? And go ahead,
How
Randy.
do you spell that? Yeah. Okay, Randy.
Steve, I just wanted to suggest to those that are on from Takoma Park, if they have neighborhood areas that they think have not been paid attention to, or that are potential sites for neighbors to work together, let us know. You know, whether it's just 1, 2, 3, 5 of you, those kinds of opportunities, and the kind of the country or the complement to that, if there are some great examples of neighbors that are already working together, let us know of that. Working together in terms of dealing with stormwater and potential flooding.
Okay.
Thanks. And I know there's been another question about is there an organization that can be contacted in the city for help? And the Department of Public Works invites people to talk to them about their problems, but I can tell you that if it's not related to public property, they're gonna be very limited in what they can do. But that's a good place to start. And then I would also say just email TSS at the TSS email address, which is on the website.
Hey, Steve, something else that I had to cut out because of time was mapping tools and where flooding occurs. You've got the LIDC points with street addresses. There's one that Maryland DNR runs that's free. You can do it on your smartphone or computer. It's called MyCoast. And they have the Stormwater Reporter where you can go and you can utilize that. So you go look at St. Michael's. I think Chris gave an example down there. I'll tell you what, you go to St. Michael's, you start looking at the pictures, there are people that are out there, they're documenting the flooding. And so this can become a tool to take that LIDC plan to the next level because you begin showing the patterns. When we get half, because it ties to local rain gauges. When you get half-inch rain, we start seeing flooding down through here.
Eric, would you be so kind as to put that in the chat, that contact?
Yes, sir.
That is fascinating. We have been looking for that.
I wanted you to know, Eric and et al., I am actually walking the city and mapping sites that are appropriate for not just stormwater management, but the big dog, the flood control. And I found some pretty interesting sites on paper streets and some with shared properties, private owners. That big stream that you looked at through Forest Park, that was one of the long tributaries. It's a very interesting stream valley, and it's all private property except for the park itself down at the bottom. And that's another compelling place. And Brashears Run, the most vulnerable place where the city hall is, the library is, and thousands of apartments are, is also historically been on the flood maps, the FEMA flood maps, and remains so. And we've tried over time to prevent the community center from expanding there and not building the library there. That was kind of just pushed under the storm drain.
Yeah. I just noticed that somebody put in a comment about trees, and I think everybody agrees that the role of trees is absolutely fundamental. And I would call it vegetation restoration. With trees, obviously, is a very important part. And TSS has tried to work with Casey Trees in the past. Casey Trees was pretty much ready to go, but TSS was not able to get the property owners ready to go. It's just to say that if somebody can identify a group of properties where a tree-based project might be useful, please let us know. We'd like to talk to them. Randy, you have a...
Yeah, I would, wondering with regard to Professor Ellis, how close is, I guess, how much more data would you need to do some or part of Takoma Park? The way that you did that Baltimore neighborhood, how far off are we from having adequate data to do the visualization which you provided, which was excellent?
Thank you very much. Yeah, the data exists already. The question is how, there's always ways of improving your precision to all of the modeling that you do. But you can work, the MNC PPC has GIS data layers available to download that you can just use to plug into the model. Then you just need to have the software. I have obviously the software. I teach this kind of work with the students and so on. Yeah, it's all there. And then the question is, though, I think I know you can download 2-foot contours that are probably done using photogrammetry. But if the city or the county has LiDAR data, then you can get even higher precision to your elevation data. And then I think the next step after that is probably using surveyors, but then things get much more expensive.
When you say using surveyors, do you mean human beings out using?
Human, yes, with
Yeah.
survey equipment. Yep, it can be
Right.
very expensive. So the more LiDAR is usually the the best data source you can get to do a watershed probably the size of the ones that you're looking for. The TR55 would not be appropriate for doing all of Sligo Creek watershed. It's too large. But it would be appropriate for the watersheds that come off the side of Sligo Creek. It's good for up to about 25 square miles, but that's pushing it. It's better for smaller watersheds, but that's free. TR55 you can download. It's a NRCS, a Natural Resources Conservation Service. A Win TR55. It runs on a PC, and there's a user guide. It's 265 pages, so it's not light reading, but it is available. And then you would need to have some kind of, I think QGIS is free. I don't use it. I use ArcGIS, but QGIS probably could be used to do a lot of processing of that data. And then there's the visualization tools.
Thank you, Dr. Ellis. We are hitting almost 8:30. I wanted to let you know that Dave Heller had recommended something which we should meet about, having how to help the homeowners plant more trees and how to play facilitator role to bring neighbors together to collaborate or to address conflict among neighbors over stormwater issues. Those are excellent suggestions for topics coming up. And I'm going to turn it back over to Steve to say the last word here for us. Thank you.
Well, the last word is thank you so much to the speakers. You've put a lot of time into it. I know that you all could have spoken for an hour. It's very hard to shorten a talk, and that's a wonderful effort. You did a great job. I found this very digestible. A lot of what Professor Ellis was saying was, let's say, something I would have to think about. But I think the main point is that this is something that's could become an important priority for the Takoma Park City. TSS will monitor its email address. We'll continue to put things on our website. Don't want to make a lot of promises about what we're going to be able to do, but we will continue to advocate for comprehensive planning in Takoma Park and bring in other expertise to complement the problems that DPW has. It's a lot of work. Okay, Randy, you had something to add?
Just one last thing. Yes, we will post the questions and answers on our website. So if you go back, we can promise you that.
And thank you all for hanging out. Everybody stayed. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.